that we all are privileged to be part of. So thank you all, and thank you everyone for being here.
Thank you, Julie, for those beautiful words. And so now, the moment you've all been waiting for, the photography panel, the aesthetics of carceral aesthetics. So. So today I am happy to present to you Larry Cook, a wonderful photographer, Howard University professor. We have Sandra McCormick and Keith Calhoun, award-winning photographers, documentary photographers. And we have Sarah Bennett, who's also an award-winning photographer, joining us from Zoom. Sarah, can you hear us?
Yes, I can.
You can, awesome. Would you mind turning on your video? We'd love to see you. Great. Hi.
Hi.
So, before we get started, I just want to do a brief introduction of everyone. If you could, well, actually, no, let's just get right into it. Okay. There, would you mind starting? Great.
All right, hello everyone. Hi. I want to first thank everyone with Marking Time, all the artists. It's definitely been a great symposium so far. Very inspirational. Try not to be too long. I'm professors, I can be long-winded. So I want to talk about my work as it relates to carceral aesthetics, its relationship to the photographic archive, and how I kind of employ stage photography and collage work as a means to kind of interpret carceral and to kind of extend carceral aesthetics. So it really kind of began I want to say in 2008, I had two uncles that were formerly incarcerated. They both did about 10 years in prison. My uncle on the far left, Andre Cook Sr., and then his brother, Almonte Pastel on the far right. And in the middle, as you can see, is a back of a Polaroid in which he writes to his brother. So it says to Donnie. So his name was Andre, we all call him, Big Donnie. To Donnie, the fat boy, I love you, bro. Keep your head up. We will see the outside and do it like old times. From your little bro, Big Al, the dark side. And this was the first piece that I created within a series titled When Dad Comes Home. And the title kind of derives from the conversations with my cousins, their children. And I was kind of reflecting on the past, but also thinking about the future when they would be released. When they came home, they had these massive photo albums that they had collected, over their time in prison. And I was just really kind of inspired by the stories behind the images. And I wanted to kind of create work using that as source material. So the things I began to kind of parcel through and pull from, which is kind of embedded in this image or this piece, the sense of brotherhood and those kind of relationships, being incarcerated and how important it is to their survival. Let me get to the next slide. This is my uncle, Andre, with his son over a period of, 10 years when he was incarcerated at different times in the visiting room. And to me, it was just really powerful because I wanted to, you have these images of, inmates in the yard and in the visiting room, and you have these various poses and this sense of kind of projecting, the sense of masculinity, and the sense of detachment. But I wanted to kind of create a series that really showed the human side to these people, and but also thinking about the complexities of fatherhood, being incarcerated, and trying to be in your child's life through visiting rooms, through visits, letters, pictures, and during their time of incarceration, we would exchange letters and images. So my understanding and the importance of the archive really began there. During that time, I had lost one of my uncles, Uncle Al Almonte, and so for a while it was just really difficult to talk about the work, to present the work. So I did for a long time, and began to kind of work through that. And I met Nicole in 2019 at the James A. Porter Colloquium at Howard University. I was just really inspired by her work on carceral aesthetics, and really kind of inspired me to kind of dig deeper and kind of push forward. At that time, I had been, collecting prison Polaroids, and was really interested in the backdrop and the pose, particularly, as Richard Majors, as he deems the cool pose. And it's the way of, kind of masking certain fear, anxiety, and kind of showing a certain coolness and in a way of showing power. But I wanted to kind of subvert that a little bit. Also push against the gaze that's associated with, mugshot photography. So having them kind of turning away from the camera. But also thinking about having them kind of engage with the backdrop as well. Next slide.
Can I interject?
Yes.
Can you please tell us where these images are now?
Yes.
Kind of a big deal.
Yeah, I was going to get to
Sorry.
So in producing this work, and this work after meeting Nicole was included and is featured in the Mark and Time exhibition, along with the previous series When Dad Comes Home. And then through that exhibition at Moment PS1, the work was acquired by the Museum of Modern Art.
So Larry is in a permanent collection, photo collection of the Museum of Modern Art now.
Yes. And the Harvard Art Museum as well.
Yes.
So, the Mark and Time exhibition was really a pivotal moment in my career, and being introduced to the various artists and the scholarship surrounding carceral aesthetics really inspired me to kind of continue to work through photography, the archive. But one of the things that was always in the back of my mind was working with this vernacular photography, but little is known about the photographers behind the camera. So I wanted to see if I could kind of change that narrative. So last summer in 2021, I had an opportunity to do a project at the Canary Test in LA. And it was really kind of centered around me and my work, but through different dialogues and kind of just how evolution of the project, it turned to kind of focusing on photographers who were formerly incarcerated and wanting to give a platform, provide them with a platform to tell their story. So we kind of constructed this studio, and we found 5 formerly incarcerated photographers who did time in San Quentin, which was really amazing because we were able to find them in short time when we really thought it was more like finding a needle in a haystack, so to speak. And then the next slide. Yeah, so we were able to find these photographers, and they just created these amazing self-portraits. So the first one is Jonathan. So as you can see, he's going for a faceless self-portrait. And these are all of his prison IDs. And the last one is the ID that he got when he was released. So it kind of shows this progression. And then Adamu, who's also a documentary filmmaker as well, he would tell me about being in San Quentin, which next to the Pacific Ocean, how being in the yard you can smell the water, but you can't see it. So he wanted to kind of echo that experience in his self-portrait. So it was just a tremendous opportunity. The work was well received, and it also allowed my work as an artist to kind of evolve into more of a social practice. And my plan is to kind of continue this project in different cities, and in kind of developing an archive of these self-portraits, and ultimately to have a museum exhibition. So that's one of my goals. This work here, so as I mentioned before, I began developing my own archive and collection of prison Polaroids. And I wasn't quite sure, I knew I wanted to use it as source material, but I wasn't quite sure which direction to go. And I'm always kind of thinking about the ethics of photography, especially as it relates to appropriation. And then I really kind of thought back to visual artist Michael Samorov's work, Absence of Subject, in which he appropriated August Saunders' famous portraits and removed the figure, kind of leaving these interior spaces and landscapes. So it was kind of a way to kind of think about landscapes from a different perspective. You think about landscapes from a really romanticized perspective, thinking about freedom and possibility. But what about being in the confinement of prison and how that can change? But this work is also currently featured in the Afrofuturism exhibition at the Venice Biennale. So it's kind of thinking about a future without mass incarceration. What would these prisons look like? Would they be relics? What would a vernacular photography look like in the future without mass incarceration? So instead of seeing Polaroids with bodies, with inmates, seeing these empty prisons, and we kind of go through. So like I said, it's in the Venice Biennale. It's going to be part of the traveling exhibition as well. And so that's where my practice. And I didn't see it this way years ago, but it just kind of developed into focusing on carceral aesthetics. And it's really meaningful because since then I lost both my uncles. And they didn't get a chance, Uncle Andre didn't get a chance to see the work at former PS1. But we talked about the importance of the work, how to impact those that are incarcerated, those that have been released in terms of reentry programs. So, part of my practice is kind of continuing their legacy and memory through the work. Also work with nonprofits and in a different fashion, kind of aside from my artwork as well. And this is kind of where I'm at recently in terms of what I've been creating. So kind of building upon, thinking about pushing the landscape beyond the prison walls, kind of realizing freedom as well. So kind of thinking about the work and then kind of narrative art and placing them outside in these spaces. And also kind of challenging the notion of this pose as kind of thinking about it not thinking about it from the perspective of detachment or masking, but kind of thinking onward, looking at the future, looking past the horizon, thinking about the possibilities, and the upward journey that many of these inmates have to, former inmates have to embark as they move on with their lives. So it's currently untitled. I'm still kind of working through, the meaning, but I've really been interested in kind of subverting the gaze identity, and finding a balance between, incorporating the figure and landscapes. So, thank you.
Real quick, I just wanted to comment on, it's really interesting with the pose that you have a lot of different people taking the pose in front of different settings. And so that really creates a relationship between images. So I'm trying to find Chandra Keith's video. Okay. Sarah, would you mind presenting before Chandra and Keith?
No, can
Oh, I think you're muted.
you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Do you want me to go now?
Yes, please. That'd be great.
Okay, let me just set my timer so I stick to my time, okay?
Okay.
Okay. Hi, everybody. I'm Sarah. I'm in Brooklyn, New York, and I'm really sorry I can't be there today. And I just was going to tell you a little bit about my trajectory and how I got started on this photography. And you're not seeing my screen, are you? I think you have to allow me to share my screen.
Okay. Voila. You should be ready to go.
You can see my screen, right? Can you see it?
Yes.
Okay, good. So I'm a former criminal defense attorney, and I did that work for about 18 years and stopped the practice in about 2004 and had a whole separate career. But I always had like a pro bono case or two. And around 2008, I picked up a case of a woman who had a 75-year life sentence in New York State, and I was trying to get clemency for her from the governor of New York. And I was trying to figure out how to humanize her in a way that, would make her more real to the governor, who was the person who was going to make that decision. And so I met some of the women who had been incarcerated with her, and these are the photos you see here. And I just took their portraits and I asked them to talk about what my client, whose name is Judy, meant to them. And I put together a little book called Spirit on the Inside, and I sent it to, at that time it was 2012, there was a newly created Commission on Reentry in New York State, and I sent it to all 50 members, and I sent it to the governor, and pretty much anybody I could think of. And eventually there were about 2,000 copies in circulation. And it was the response to these images that sort of set me down this photography path, because people were like, oh, she was in prison, what was she in prison for? And they wanted to know more about the women in these images. And I realized that the images that most people had of people in prison, particularly women, because we hadn't seen many of them, was, mugshots or arrest photos or something like that. And so it started me down this photography path. I'm not going to talk about all my series. I have 4 of them at this point. But this is, I did a re-entry series that's ongoing, so it's been going on for 9 years already. And this was my first portrait subject. Her name was Kayla. She'd been in prison for 18 years, and I met her 2 weeks after she'd been released from prison. And I followed her just sort of in her everyday life, and 4 other women at the same time. And always I was interviewing them about, what was this, I asked her for a prized possession she had brought home from prison, and she told me about the baseball glove. Her father had given it to her. They played baseball in prison. But she also then told me about how her father died while she was in prison, and what that meant, and how she went to the funeral and being shackled, and just so many stories came out. And so I did this with 4 women for about maybe a year and a half, and I had my first exhibition. And so the first series, through the interviewing, I tried to cover a lot of what reentry was about. And I was always, these are photos of the first 4 women I photographed. This became a separate series called The Bedroom Project, and part of it is in this MoMA PS1 show. And I was photographing women. At this point, I have 30 women. My original idea was I was going to have 50 women, and I wanted to plaster it on the walls and just have 50 images and sort of a massive response to mass incarceration. So I sort of lost track of that at a certain point because I was incorporating the women's handwriting and asking, I wanted them to be more part of the dialogue. So it wasn't just their image, but how did they feel when they looked at these photos of themselves. But when I walked into MoMA PS1 and I saw Mark Lofney's work, where he had really plastered the whole room with all his images, I was like, oh yeah, that's what my original idea was for the Bedroom Project. And so I went back to photographing more, and I think Alex said at the last workshop that Mark got out today, and he and I have plans for one day exhibiting our two works together sort of as the faces of mass incarceration of men and women. But the work that I always had wanted to do, and it just took me maybe 12 or 13 years to get there, was to show women inside prison. And I focus only on women with life sentences, and that's a very conscious decision on my part, because when I first started doing this photography work, it was about the time when Obama was starting to talk about how we should open up the prison doors to people who had been convicted of low-level drug offenses, which I think was wonderful. But I was like, but what's going to happen to all the people serving life sentences, the people with no hope of ever getting out? So this is the project that is kind of like the dearest to me of them all, because I was able to get inside New York State's maximum security prison for women. And again, I incorporated the writing of the women in their photos. There's a real difference between the writing on of the women on the inside and the outside. The outside is so full of hope, no matter how desperate the living situations are. The women are just so happy to have their freedom, whereas the women in these images feel so forgotten and so afraid that they're never going to see the light of day. I've gotten to know these women very well, and there were so many things that I tried to think about when I was doing this work. Well, for one, I have the oldest, this woman was 15 years old, so she got a life sentence at the age of 15. And this woman was the oldest woman I photographed, and she's now 74. She's very ill. She's living on the medical unit. She just found out last week that she's getting parole, but it won't be for about 3 more months. So, hoping she's going to make it. But in the writing, I had to be very aware of the fact that they're still in prison, and that your narrative is not complete until you're out of prison. You have to always be very careful about what you're going to say, because you don't want it to come back to harm you. And so I think because I was a defense attorney, I sort of had the unique ability to sort of see down the road. And so this woman here, Andrea, I met her 2 years before she was going to parole, and she told me that she was innocent, and that's what she had written, that she was innocent. And I said, but how about if you write about something else? Because you're going to go to the parole board in 2 years, and who knows, maybe you'll have a lawyer and they'll tell you to take responsibility or something. And sure enough, 2 years later, about 4 months before she was going to the board, she wrote to me and she said, could I write her a letter of support? And I asked her, did she have any help? And she told me no. And I said, do you want me to find somebody? So I actually found a law student who I took through the process. So basically I was behind the scenes. And the reason she thought she was innocent is because she was convicted of felony murder. So she actually hadn't done anything. And so she was maybe factually innocent, but not legally innocent. I just didn't want that to come back, sort of to haunt her. I guess there's just, I have a dialogue with the women. Before I photographed them all, it was sort of a big word of mouth kind of project, but I went and visited each woman in the visiting room. We spent probably about an hour with each person, talked about the project, whether they wanted to be involved in it, how they wanted to be involved, and then I came back after a lot of negotiation with the Department of Justice, and photographed them. And then many of the women have sort of, this is Leah inside prison, and then she came home, and so now she's joined the Bedroom Project. This is Monica, also was released from prison and has joined the Bedroom Project, but also what now I have called a Wedding Project, because I have three of the women I photographed so far have gotten married since they came home. And then this is Judy, my client, the one who sort of started me down this whole photography path. And this is her. So she did get clemency from the governor a couple of years ago, and she also came home. One of the things that I love about this work so much is the ability, especially when there's public exhibitions, to connect with people. So I was in this huge exhibition in Brooklyn Bridge Park, which is actually where I met Nicole. But I also got to talk to the Attorney General of the state of New York, who just was passing through, and she was sort of defending the Attorney General's office's policy of they have to defend the parole board when they deny parole. And there were one of the women I had photographed was with her, and she talked to the Attorney General. She said, you know, I did my 15 years. Why did I have to do an extra 10 years? Like, there was nothing different. And so it was an opportunity, I think, to, you know, sort of just expand the dialogue in a way that you never get to do as a lawyer and as an artist, especially when we get these opportunities to speak and have our work shown. And just last week, the pardon attorney for the Department of Justice asked me whether she could exhibit this entire series. And I was like, absolutely, you can have it, because it's now going to be on the wall in their office, where they're determining whether or not to give pardons to people. And it's a way of them thinking that there are people behind those legal documents or the number on the piece of paper. So I really want to, I'm really sorry I'm not there today in person, and I'm just thank you, Nicole, especially for this big opportunity that you've given so many of us.
Thank you for your presentation.
Right no more.
Would you like to talk?
I'd just like to give y'all an intro to what you're about to see. This is a video of a man named Gary Tyler. Oh, you didn't see it? Okay. All right.
Okay, playing the video.
Oh, it's alright. And if you rise in the morning, bring judgment day. Oh, good God. Make me sound way back yonder. Sound like it's good old times. It was soon one morning when the sun had rise. And I was thinking about my good-looking baby. I would hang my head and cry. So lonesome. Go down, old Anna, please don't ride no more. And if you do rise in the morning, set this world on fire. If you had been on the river somewhere 19 and 10, they were driving the women just hard as they do the men. That was bad.
As I look back, I said, I spent a great deal of my life locked up without having been free.
They say everything can be replaced, yet every distance is not near. So I remember every face of every man who put me here. I've seen my light come shining from the west down to the east. Any day now, I shall be released. They say every man needs protection. They say every man must fall. Yet I swear I see my reflection.
You read the Bible, you talk about Solomon and Gomorrah, and how people were so obsessed with their life until they didn't think about anything else. And Gomorrah was like that. You had so much, you had homosexuality going on, you had rape, you had murder, every year was mayhem in that Gomorrah. And some guys, their attitude was that, I'm a Rome, I gotta live like the Romans. So if I'm in a barbarian type environment, I have to be the next barbarian. And that's the attitude that we had. And you know what I went through. Dealing with that parish, the DA, standing in parish, how everything, seemed like everybody was hard. There was no hope for compromise and nothing. And when this guy was willing to talk, right there I saw a red light.
Crying out that he was afraid.
We go a long way back. Patience, that's what I learned. Patience was a virtue.
And inside, all we had was each other. And we cherish that. We cherish that. So this is that culmination of this same thing. And he's not the last man standing. Every time I pull one, it's somebody else's last man standing. But the impediment was, we can't go nowhere because of looking.
Nice meeting you. What's your name?
Jamil.
Jamil. Nice meeting you, Jamil. And what's your name? Willie. Willie? Jamil, Willie.
My name's Faith.
Faith? How you doing, Faith?
My name's Javon.
My name's Javon. All right. Your name?
Corey.
Corey?
Oh, no, I'm in.
What's my name?
Mr. Ing. What's your name? Sarah. Gary.
Gary?
Yeah, Mr. Gary.
Tyler.
Gary Tyler.
I probably believe most people believe that most people go to prison because they come from a dysfunctional family, because they from the hood, because they were this, they were that. But when you really deal with reality, it's about the choices that you make. And you had to live with those choices. And my motto on the street now is, I'm in competition with no one. I would desire to be better today than I was yesterday.
We have done so much. We have done so much. With so little. For so little. For so long. For so long. That we are now qualified. We are now qualified to do anything. To do anything. With nothing. With nothing. And I'm going to take and recite this. I am the willing. I am the willing. Doing the impossible. Doing the impossible. For the ungrateful. For the ungrateful. I have done so much. I have done so much. With so little. With so little. For so long. For so long. And I am qualified to do anything. To do anything. With nothing. With nothing.
yourself. You extended yourself to the community and brought the community in with you. And I think you are a perfect example of the manifestation of the warrior who didn't bow down. So I forgot won't bow down. Won't bow down. Won't bow down. We don't know how you won't bow down. Won't bow down. Dirty crown, you won't bow down. Won't bow down. Dirty bow down, you won't bow down. Won't bow down. Dirty crown, you won't bow down. Won't bow down. How you call it? Won't bow down. Won't bow down. Show up. Won't bow down. Queen. Oh. Won't bow down. Won't bow down. Not on that ground, no. Won't bow down. Won't bow down. On the ground, no. Sauce. Won't bow down. Won't bow down. Don't know how you
All right, thank you for sharing that beautiful video with us.
All right. So this project was very near and dear to us. Gary and I are the same age. And at 15 years old, he was a young man that was incarcerated and sent to Angola to death row. And I couldn't believe it because I was the same age. And so it's been a community project. You guys saw the big banner, Free Gary Tyler. That's been an ongoing thing for like 40 years. And right now, we're gonna plan something because he's been home for almost 4 years, but the entire community does not know. And so we're gonna plan something, for that, and we continue to work with this organization called VOTE. It's Voice of the Experience. It's ran by and founded by a man named Norris Henderson. And he, along with other organizations in New Orleans, the Innocence Project, and other people who put their efforts out to have platforms for people who are incarcerated, we continue to work with people like that. And every day, I can tell you, Norris probably goes to Angola 3 times a week, and he's gonna bring somebody home.
Also, I'd like to comment that the brother Albert Woodfox and Herman Wallace and Robert King, they protected Gary in Angola. He was a little boy, and they couldn't believe that the state of Louisiana put a young boy among the wolves, so they stood for him. They put their life on the line to make sure that he was protected instead of them raping him, abusing him. They raised him as a son. So there's a lot of things, stories like that we don't get to hear, and that's the type of stuff we need to be heard about.
And Albert Woodfox wrote about that in his book, Solitary.
Yeah.
He writes about Gary and how they organized to protect him.
That's right. They put their life
It's
on
really
the line.
beautiful.
So this work, we've been doing it for a long time, and I'm sure Xavier has some questions or whatever, but the basis of our, I know he does. The basis of our work is about the labor force in Louisiana.
Thank you. And so, as photographers, we know it only takes like a split second, depending on your shutter speed, to take a picture, but there's a lot of work that leads up into taking that picture, between, building relationships with people and places. Can each of you speak to some of that process of building a relationship before the picture?
Well, for us documenting Angola for the last 30, say maybe started in the 80s, but it takes time to get into the interior of the prisons, because normally they'll just give you a tourist or the mechanic or the good things, but working with Gary and Norris Henderson and Wilbur Rito, who ran the Angle, I was able to venture to parts of the prison where normally the camera wouldn't go, so I was able to get to the lockdown and places like that. And it just was like with Wilbur Rito, he was the Anglelite editor. He learned to read and write on death row, so I was inspired by these brothers. I was a young photographer then, and I go to a maximum security prison, and the brothers running a prison magazine that was quality. So I was able to, work and get in places like that. And me and Chandra established a relationship and a friendship.
And real quick, by no means, I would imagine going into places like that would be very difficult, seeing people under those kinds of conditions. So, like, what kind of internal work do you have to do as well?
It is, like my first experience going to Angola was, it was good because I knew that I was going to hopefully see some people that I had known and maybe hadn't seen in years. But, I don't know if you all saw the image of the barbed wire fence with all those bodies behind it. That was a lot for me, just to see, all those black men locked up. And so I think that when I would leave Angola, even though I was happy I was there and I saw the people that I saw, you have to like decompress because there's so much that you've taken in. And for me, that's a process that I think I have to go through every time.
So as we kind of talk about relationships, I just want to take a moment. It's such an honor to be sharing the stage with Sandra and Keith. You guys have been doing this work for 40 plus years, and I just want everyone to give them a round of applause. For me, in terms of process, I'm a conceptual artist, so a lot of it is in terms of the planning stage. I'll sit on ideas for periods of time. Even the other side of the landscape, the images that I reappropriated, that was in a lot of ways 10 years in the making. So photography and being a conceptual artist, it teaches you patience. But it's really important because when you put a product out, you want to do your due diligence in terms of your research. I consult and converse with those that were incarcerated, often collaborate, receive their input. So a lot of ways I think about the projects that I do is a form of collaboration as well.
And Sarah, can you speak to the question?
Yeah, I think the relationships are also really key. And as I said, I met with the portrait subjects. I actually have established really strong relationships with all the women in prison, which I didn't expect to happen because I thought of it more as a one-off project. But email came into the prison right after I first started exhibiting this work. And so email is a much easier way of communicating than letter writing. So I've actually gotten to know the women really well, and I have to say also, like Chandra, going into prison is really hard. As a photographer, I saw so many things that I never ever saw as a lawyer. As a lawyer, I never got past the lawyer room or the visiting room. As a photographer, I got to see the whole prison system. One of the best things about the relationships is I actually had an exhibit of this work in the maximum security prison where I took it about 2 months ago, and it took almost 2 years to get the exhibit in there. And so I got to see all the women who I had photographed, and it was like coming home to old friends. And it was like it was kind of an amazing thing, but it was also amazing to see them see their photos up really big. And then to see how the other women in the prison responded to the work. And they all wanted me to expand the project, and could I please include them? Because, there are pluses to being a portrait subject in this work. People get to know about you, they know your story, they, almost, I have to say, almost half the women I photographed have gotten out of prison, then it's because, you know, I was a lawyer and I formed relationships with them, I found lawyers for them, or I helped them myself, you know, things like that. So, but yeah, I always am very conscious of, you know, that it's still their image, right? And I have to be, I always ask them, are you sure? Do you want this image out in the world? It's going to be at such and such a place. Do you still want your image on the wall? Those kinds of things. And those relationships are deep and really meaningful.
I have one more question. Sarah, you kind of spoke to this by like talking about how people respond to their images, but I'm curious to know, like, there's all this process that goes into the image, but then how do you feel like that process is actually reflected by the image? Like how people receive it? Does that make sense?
I think it's important. I think it's important the way we as artists or photographers put individual's image out there. We're responsible for how we present them so they can be portrayed by the public, the media, or anyone else. And so that is something that we have to take in consideration in how we display their looks and, you know, their likeness for them and their families.
Thank you. Awesome. Well, I'm going to open up the floor to Q&A. If anyone has any questions, I'll come around with the mic. So your hand go first.
Thank you. So I have a question for Chandra McCormick and Larry Cook. Thank you for that. That was so moving, the video. And I have a question about Africanisms and spirituality. So I've been doing research on the Gullah Geechee culture, you know, islands off the coast of Savannah, etc. They really were known for holding on to their African cultural practices during slavery, everything from food to dance to music. And it was so striking to me, that video of the celebration for Gary with all the African dancing, right? And I'm wondering, have you experienced, in the way Gary talks about incarceration, or even just the celebration of his return, any discussion of holding on to a sense of Africanness as a source of resilience and strength throughout that time? And like, how does that kind of Black consciousness and that sense of connection at all to the continent factor into a sense of faith or hope?
The releasing of Gary was so, for the community of New Orleans, if you knew Gary Tyler's situation, but the group of women who were there, they would go to Angola, they called Kumbuka, and they would go there, Gary would invite them to the prison. So he established a relationship with the community to bring African dance and drumming. And he ran the theater in the prison. One thing I can say about going to Angola, I met a lot of people in Angola. They wasn't just doing time, they were changing. Like Norris, he sued Angola. The reason why Angola where it's at today, because of the guys who incarcerated there changed from within. That means that they sued the prison. Every wheelchair ramp you see in Angola is because of Norris Henderson. The reason why you see free Black people in the prison because of Norris and them suing the prison, which some of them became just as racist as other men on the horse. So a lot of things, to me, that they was able to retain is because of the arts. Like Gary ran the theater. He created a play called A Passion. And I think it's in Aperture, right? That Deborah Luster, she did a great photo. But I was always amazed about the creativity, how those guys take nothing, that we have all the resources, and you go to Angola, they didn't took stuff out the kitchen and made the costumes for the production. So, you know, it keeps us focused on the creativity that's locked up. So we try our best to get in and document every time we have a chance to show that life, because they don't let I would say Shonda might be the first African American woman to get in a maximum security prison and have full access to document. So we have to cherish that moment because, you know, we don't get any grants for our work. All our work came from out our own pocket because we know it's necessary that we document that. But the sisters you've seen, that they took care of Gary. They would go up there and perform. And so when he came home, it was like, you know, a new life beginning because and Norris Henderson and the two brothers Calvin, they the ones who helped free Gary. And for a fact, that's what I was saying, a lot of those guys incarcerated, they studied the law more than some of the people out in the free world. So policies there, yeah. So there's a lot of great work going on, but we just don't get it out enough, you know, or don't show it, you know, like how we followed Gary coming home. That was an honor for us when the word came down that Gary was going to be released. We wanted to be there to make sure we captured that moment, you see, because that was a historical moment, because the word was Gary was supposed to never get out of Angola. Even the governor, you know, it was political, that he should never be released.
Four governors that we had signed a non-release for Gary Tyler, and a few of them supposedly made promises to the family that they would never under their administration would he ever get out. So thank you, Nicole Fleetwood, also, and marking time for having this platform to present such works as all of these symposiums today, and all of the other speakers and people who have been incarcerated that are giving us knowledge, you know, through this. So this is a great platform for information.
Great, great.
Thank you, Shonda. There's so much. We're all coming from so many different places, and you know, you're blessing us here as well. So, thank you.
Hi. Oh yeah, I'm not comfortable with the microphone. This is more for you, all of you as the artists, as the photographers. I'm a multimedia artist myself, but I've never dabbled or really got into the camera. And I know that each implement that we use becomes an extension of ourselves. I've seen some work there that was really moving, especially that piece the young man did about the water. Tell me about your eye. How do you, because I'm also amazed at musicians, how I think they create and pull stuff up out of the air, you know, for the music and stuff. So tell me about your eyes. That camera becomes an extension. Yeah. Can you speak more on it? I mean, how do you know if it's that sharp? You know.
Well, you know.
Well, like I said, I'm a conceptual artist and working primarily in photography. I shoot with a 4x5. So it's a really slow process and it's very expensive. So, you know, a lot of planning and thought has to go behind it. And in terms of just, you know, the eye, it kind of goes, you know, in training, you know, going to school, studying photographers. You know, one of my favorite photographers is David Bay. And the way that he shoots everyone democratically. No matter their position in society, everyone is kind of viewed as equal. And I try to embody that in my work as well. But my wife, Nakia Brown, who's also a photographer, so you know, nothing really goes out into the world without her approving it. So she's kind of like my photo editor as well. So. As I'm sure you guys can.
Yeah. You know, we're documentary photographers, so it's like you get that image while you can, and I think that a lot of the work that we've been doing over the years, it's kind of automatic now, and it's like, but I know what you're talking about. At that one time, I would be out there wanting to get that shot.
Right.
And I remember some years back having that, once I hit that shelf, I got it. I just kind of know it, and I can't wait to get home to process my film to see it. So I have had that feeling that you're talking about, like I know I got it, but I think that the work now, it's like whatever I shoot, it layers on top of any body of work that I have. You know, like it all connects, and even today it's still even today, you know, it's still relevant, is what I'm saying. So I pre-visualize now. When I go out, I know what I want to look for, and I know what I want to shoot. So I just kind of tune into that.
Well, I think, to me, photography is developing an eye and a style. You know, you can, like a lot of people with the cell phone, they may take pictures, but they don't print them, so you'll never feel it, to just touch it to me. You know, I have to, like, even if I shoot with my digital, I'm still going to make physical prints to feel the image, because I think seeing, you know when you got something, you put it on the wall, you know, and if it moves you. But I think the most important thing, you know, working and printing your work had a lot of influence. But for instance, Chandra, when she started, she just used to print in a dark room. So when she started photographing, she had already developed a sense of composition and lighting. Because she would always tell me, you need to get in closer. Oh, you too, you know. And then I said, why don't you shoot? That's when I messed up, because then the habit, you know, photography is worse than a crack habit. You know, every time, I don't know anybody at that B&H camera store, please get me a gift card, because when me and Shonda started, we would buy like a brick of film and we would go to shoot a second line of event, and I thought we had like 20 rolls and I wound up with 5, and she go in the process, she got 15. I was like, what's happening? It's been a great journey, because to find someone to share the passion, especially in photography, for a long time, me and Chandra had a lot of friends. When Christmas come by, they would come by our studio and say, what you got, Chandra? Chandra said, well, I bought the print wash and the lens. And I was like, girl, you better catch up with the time.
They said, that looks like a big fish tank to me. Yes, it's been great.
So I want to interrupt, because in 1 minute, Mark Lotney is going to zoom in. He was released from prison 6 hours ago. But before that, I want Sarah, I want to just hear a little bit more from you about your current projects. We're sorry you can't be here with us, but we feel your presence. What are you working on now?
I'm actually basically continuing, and I'm also starting to do some videoing or filming, because both the oldest and the youngest of the women I photographed inside prison are coming out soon, and so I'm hoping to show, you know, somebody who went in at 15 and comes out at 28 or 30, and somebody who is coming out at 75, like their experiences are going to be so different. So a lot of continuing seeing, and hopefully Mark and I have an idea. I'm so happy to see what he looks like.
So I don't think we can keep you connected, but hopefully you can see us live streaming.
I'll see him here.
Okay, so see us live streaming, okay? Thank you. Join me in thanking Sarah, see you in person soon. Are you ready?